I only half understood. I believed the selection marked me as worthy, as exceptional among my brothers, as chosen for a calling higher even than the chapter that had forged me from a boy into something more than human. The Death Watch, the Long Watch, the Emperor's scalpel in a galaxy drowning in Xeno's filth. I had memorized every litany, studied every historical account available in the Librarius aboard the Macraga's Honor, imagined myself standing in the tradition of heroes who had hunted tyrannids through frozen wastelands and purged orc empires from the void. When the summons arrived, bearing the seal of Watch Commander Vicus and countersigned by my own chapter master, I knelt and gave thanks to the Primarch's memory and swore I would not dishonor the trust placed in me. The fortress squatted on a moon called Thalassa Prime, a lifeless sphere of cracked basalt and radiation storms orbiting a dead star. It was not beautiful. It was not inspiring. The walls rose from the lunar surface like the ribcage of some fossilized titan, black stone fused with ceramite and adamantium, studded with gun emplacements and auger arrays that swept the void in endless vigilance. There were no banners here, no heraldry visible from orbit, no grand statues commemorating victories or fallen heroes. Only the skull and eye sigil, the inquisitorial rosette rendered in silver across the main gate, a reminder that we served something larger and colder than chapter pride. I descended from the Thunderhawk with 11 other aspirants, each drawn from different chapters, each wearing their colors for the last time. A blood angel, a space wolf, a dark angel who would not meet anyone's gaze, a storm warden, a black Templar whose knuckles were scarred from ritual flagellation, others whose heraldry I recognized only dimly. We did not speak. The wind across the lunar plain howled with a frequency that made my teeth ache, and the serfs who met us wore rebreathers and said nothing as they gestured us toward the fortress interior. Inside, the air tasted of recycled coolant and incense burned too long. The induction hall stretched 100 meters beneath vaulted ceilings etched with names I could not read in the dim amber lighting. Servo skulls drifted overhead, muttering Binharic prayers, their empty eye sockets flickering with crimson loomlight. At the far end, a dais supported an altar draped in black cloth, and behind it stood the assembled officers of the watch. Chaplains in skull helms, librarians in psychic hoods trailing silver chains, apothecaries with narthecium gauntlets folded across their chests, and watch captains in armor painted the color of void itself. No one smiled, no one welcomed us. Watch Commander Vicus stepped forward, a giant even among Astartes, his armor so old the ceramite had taken on an oily sheen, and the seals along his gorget bore marks I suspected were Xenos script. His voice, when he spoke, was a grinding rasp filtered through a vox grill cracked by some ancient wound. He told us we were nothing. He told us our chapters were irrelevant here. Our traditions, our oaths, our primarchs, the colors we wore, the heraldry we cherished, all of it was dust and sentiment. The Death Watch acknowledged only one loyalty, one purpose, one truth. The Xenos existed to be destroyed. We existed to destroy them. Everything else was distraction. He said the vigil would strip us of illusions, reduce us to our essential function, and rebuild us as instruments fit for the Emperor's true will. He said we would forget our former lives. He said this was necessary. He said it was mercy. Then he gestured to the serfs, and they came forward with chromed tools that gleamed under the chapel lights, and one by one they removed our pauldrons and took them away into a vault I never saw opened again. I watched my Ultramarines insignia disappear into the darkness and felt the first crack in my certainty. They gave us new armor that night. Black ceramite, unadorned except for the silver skull on the left pauldron and the inquisitorial rosette on the right. No personal heraldry, no squad markings, no oaths inscribed on the vambrace. The armor fit poorly at first, the autosenses calibrated for someone else, the interface sockets scraping against the neurological ports along my spine in ways that made my vision flicker. An apothecary, with a white scar's topknot, explained in clipped Gothic that the discomfort was intentional, a reminder that this war gear belonged not to us but to the Watch, and we were merely tenants of flesh permitted to wear it until death or discharge. He adjusted the gorget with a magno wrench, twisting until the seal hissed and my breathing became labored, then released it half a turn and told me that was how it should feel. Always a little too tight. Always a little too restrictive. So I would never forget I was bound. The first rotation began before dawn, though Thalassa Prime had no true dawn. We assembled in the kill team muster hall, a cavernous space, lit by strips of harsh white lumens that made shadows pool in the corners like spilled ink. There were 47 of us, divided into 7 kill teams by criteria no one explained. I was assigned to Team Obsidian, alongside the Blood Angel, the Space Wolf, a silver skull named Kovash, and a mentor whose name I never learned because he died on our 3rd deployment. Our watch sergeant was a Raven Guard called Vael, a thin-faced warrior with eyes like chips of slate and a voice so quiet I had to strain my autosenses to hear him during briefings. He told us our first target was an orc infestation on a mining colony called Grest, 17 days warp transit from Thalassa Prime, and that our objective was extermination without exception. No prisoners, no salvage, no glory, just killing until the Xenos stopped moving. I asked if there were colonists to evacuate. Vael looked at me as if I had spoken in Xenotong. He said the colonists were already dead, absorbed into the orc ecosystem as biomass and sport. He said asking irrelevant questions wasted the Emperor's time. Then he moved on to requisition protocols and engagement parameters, and I felt the eyes of my new brothers on me, judging, cataloging my mistake. The Blood Angel, whose name was Sariel, leaned close and whispered that questions revealed weakness, and weakness invited scrutiny, and scrutiny in the Death Watch could end with a chaplain's bolt pistol if they decided you lacked the will to serve. I did not know if he was joking. His face, pale and beautiful in the way all sons of Sanguinius were, betrayed nothing. Grest was a charnel house. The orcs had been there for months, long enough to build crude fortifications from mine equipment and colonist bones, long enough to grow to the size where their War field generated a palpable pressure against my psychic wards, even though I possessed no psycho talent. We dropped in Corvus pattern gunships, 4 kill teams coordinated by Watch Captain Dren, who observed from orbit and issued terse commands through Vox channels saturated with interference. The plan was simple. Locate the war boss, kill it, watch the tribe collapse into infighting, purge the survivors. I had fought orcs before, on the eastern fringe during the Damocles Gulf campaigns, but never like this. The Death Watch doctrine was surgical, relentless, devoid of the heroic charges and bolter hymns I had known in the Ultramarines. We moved through the mining tunnels in absolute silence, using stummers and prey-sight optics to avoid detection, killing sentries with knives and garrotes, leaving no bodies because Vael insisted greenskin corpses could spontaneously generate fungal spores if left intact. Every orc we killed, Kovash incinerated with a hand flamer, reducing them to ash and carbon scoring on the tunnel walls. It took 11 hours to reach the war boss. We found it in the central processing facility, a vast chamber where ore conveyors had been repurposed into fighting pits and the air stank of promethium and spilled blood. The beast was enormous, 3 meters tall and layered in scrap metal welded directly into its flesh, surrounded by a mob of lesser orcs hooting and brawling while it bellowed challenges at shadows. Vael gave the signal. We opened fire. Bolters, plasma, melter, everything synchronized to strike in the same half-second, a single overwhelming salvo designed to decapitate leadership before the greenskins understood they were under attack. The war boss died without seeing us, its skull vaporized by a plasma shot from Serial's weapon, and the mob dissolved into chaos just as Doctrine predicted. Then we waded in with blades and finished them while they tore at each other, and I remember thinking this was not battle but butchery, efficient and joyless, and wondering if this was what the Emperor truly wanted from his angels. No one spoke on the flight back to Thalassa Prime. We sat in the Corvus hold, armor scorched and slick with Xenos blood, and Vael cleaned his combat knife with a rag soaked in blessed oils while the engines screamed through the Imperium. Sariel murmured prayers to his Primarch, words about beauty and sacrifice that seemed hollow in the gunship's iron belly. The space wolf, whose name was Halder, sharpened his axe and sang something low in Fenrisian that might have been a dirge. I tried to feel pride, or satisfaction, or the righteousness I had known after purging the tyrannid swarms on Tarsis Ultra. Instead, I felt tired and distant, as if I had watched the battle through someone else's eyes and merely performed the motions expected of me. The watch fortress received us without ceremony. Serfs hosed the gore from our armor in decontamination chambers that reeked of lye and ammonia. Apothecaries scanned us for genetic corruption and logged our kill counts in data vaults I never saw. A chaplain, whose name I did not catch, delivered a brief sermon about the Emperor's judgment and the purity of purpose, then dismissed us to our cells. I called mine a cell, though officially it was a personal sanctum. 3 meters by 4. A cot. A weapon rack. A devotional alcove with a purity seal and a single candle that burned with a bluish flame I suspected was not wax. No window, no decorations, no connection to anything I had known before. I lay on the cot and stared at the ceiling, which was black stone veined with silver, and tried to remember the face of my first squad sergeant in the Ultramarines, the one who had taught me the Codex Astartes principles and died holding a breach against Genestealer horrors. I could not remember his name. That frightened me more than the orcs had. The rotations blurred together after Grest. We deployed, we killed, we returned. Each mission had a designation, an objective, a Xenos classification, but they bled into one another until I could no longer distinguish one Danchan from the next. An Eldar Corsair fleet harrying Imperial shipping lanes in the Corvus cluster. A Genestealer cult on a hive world called Vortan, hidden in the industrial sublevels where our flamers turned entire districts into crematoria. A Tau expeditionary force that had established a beachhead on a night world, and we infiltrated their command post during a diplomatic ceremony and butchered their ethereal caste before they could speak a word of their greater good philosophies. Every deployment followed the same pattern: intelligence briefing, equipment requisition, insertion, killing, extraction, debriefing. Each time, Vale's voice grew a little quieter, a little more mechanical, as if the act of speaking required effort he could barely muster. Each time, I felt something inside me harden and grow cold. They tested us between missions, gene screenings to ensure no Xenos taint had corrupted our biology. Psychodoctrinal evaluations where librarians asked questions designed to expose ideological deviation, combat simulations in the kill houses, vast training complexes beneath the fortress where servitors dressed in alien bioforms stalked us through artificial environments, while overseers monitored our responses and noted hesitations or inefficiencies. I failed a simulation on my 43rd day. The scenario involved a human settlement infiltrated by what appeared to be Genestealers, but the implanted colonists included children, and I hesitated for 2.3 seconds before executing them. 2.3 seconds. The servitor overseer flagged it as unacceptable. That evening, Chaplain Mortius summoned me to his sanctum, a stone chamber lit by braziers that smelled of burning bone, and for an hour he questioned my commitment to the vigil. He asked if I valued human life above the Emperor's will. He asked if sentiment clouded my judgment. He asked if I understood that mercy toward the tainted was heresy in its purest form. I gave the answers I thought he wanted, but he was not satisfied. He made me kneel and recite the litany of unmaking, a prayer I had never heard in the Ultramarines, a prayer that described humanity as clay to be molded and discarded at the Emperor's discretion. When I finished, he placed his bolt pistol against my temple and told me the next hesitation would end with the gun's discharge. I believed him. The gun's muzzle was cold even through my skin, and in that moment I understood that the Death Watch did not merely expect obedience. It demanded the annihilation of doubt, the excision of conscience, the transformation of warriors into perfect executioners who would burn worlds if the order came sealed with the inquisitorial rosette. Mortius withdrew the weapon and dismissed me, but the sensation lingered for days, a phantom pressure against my skull, and I found myself reciting the litany of unmaking in my cell at night, over and over, until the words lost meaning and became only sounds vibrating in my throat. The Space Wolf left Team Obsidian after the 78th deployment. Haraldur had been with us for nearly a standard year, and in that time he had grown increasingly erratic, muttering about dishonor and the loss of sagas, challenging enemies to single combat during missions where doctrine demanded silent extermination. Vael reported him. The chaplains summoned him. He did not return. Later, Sariel told me he had seen Haraldur in the penitent cells, chained to a wall and subjected to hypno-indoctrination cycles designed to suppress his chapter's cultural conditioning. I asked if that was even possible, if the sagas and totems that defined the Volca Fenrica could simply be erased. Sariel shrugged and said the Death Watch had methods, technologies salvaged from the Dark Age, psychic techniques borrowed from the Inquisition's most ruthless Ordo Xenos agents. He said the fortress held secrets we would never fully understand, and it was better not to ask questions that might draw the wrong kind of attention. I stopped asking questions. Our new 5th member was a storm warden named Gaius, and he integrated seamlessly because he had no personality left to integrate. He spoke only when required, executed every order without variation, and spent his downtime in a penitent crouch before his devotional alcove, whispering prayers in a voice so monotone it sounded like malfunctioning Voxcaster static. Vael seemed pleased. He told us Gaius represented the ideal, a warrior purified of ego and doubt, reshaped by the vigil into an instrument of singular purpose. I looked at Gaius and saw nothing human behind his eyes, only the reflection of whatever litanies the chaplains had burned into his psyche, and I wondered if that was what I looked like to others now. The missions grew darker. We deployed to a maiden world where Eldar had established a sanctuary for endangered Xenos fauna, and our orders were to seed the biosphere with life-eater virus. I watched from orbit as the planet's surface turned to grey sludge, forests, and oceans and alien cities dissolving into homogeneous chemical paste, and Vael remarked that the Eldar would think twice before violating Imperium-claimed space again. I wanted to argue that the world had been uninhabited by humans, that the destruction served no strategic purpose, that we had committed genocide not from necessity but from bureaucratic spite, but I said nothing. The words died in my throat, smothered by the weight of conditioning and exhaustion, and the memory of Mortius's bolt pistol against my skull. We deployed to a space hulk where Genestealers had infested a derelict cruiser, and instead of purging them with flamers, we captured specimens for an Inquisitor's research. The creatures screamed in their cages, psychic emanations so intense my nose bled and Kovash collapsed from sensory overload. We delivered them to a transport shuttle manned by black-robed figures who did not speak Gothic, and Vael told us never to mention the mission in any log or debriefing. I understood then that the Death Watch did not merely kill Xenos. It trafficked in their secrets, harvested their biology, collaborated with the very forces that should have been our enemies. The hypocrisy was staggering. But hypocrisy required a moral framework, and mine had been eroding for so long I could barely remember what principles I had once held. Sariel broke during our encounter with the Harlequins. We had been dispatched to intercept an Eldar Corsair raid on a Forge world, and the Harlequins appeared without warning, their movements too fast to track, their laughter echoing through the Vox as they cut down our support units. They did not kill us. They toyed with us. One of them, a figure in motley armor that shimmered like oil on water, danced around Sariel and whispered something in his ear. I do not know what it said, but Sariel screamed, a sound so raw and anguished it made my combat drugs spike in automatic response, and then he turned his plasma pistol on himself and fired. The shot vaporized his faceplate and everything behind it, reducing his head to superheated vapor and bone fragments. The Harlequin laughed and vanished into the webway before we could retaliate. Vael reported it as death in combat. The chaplains accepted the report without question. They gave me Sariel's personal effects, a small wooden icon of Sanguinius carved with exquisite detail, and I placed it in my devotional alcove next to the candle. For 3 days, I stared at it and tried to understand why a warrior who had survived a century of service would choose annihilation over another moment of existence. Then I understood. He had seen something in himself, some final erosion of identity, and decided oblivion was preferable to becoming what the vigil demanded. I did not judge him. I envied his courage. The replacements came in steady rotation. Warriors arrived from their chapters with pride and determination and were ground down into compliance within weeks. Some adapted, some broke, some simply disappeared, and no one asked where they went. I learned not to remember their names. Attachment was a liability. Sentiment was weakness. I existed to kill, and everything else was extraneous data, cluttering my cognitive processes. This was what the fortress taught. This was what the rituals reinforced. This was what the chaplains whispered during the psycho-conditioning sessions that occurred with increasing frequency as my service extended beyond 2 years. They told me I was exceptional. Watch Captain Dren summoned me to his strategium, a chamber walled with tactical displays showing Xenos incursion patterns across a dozen sectors. He told me my kill count exceeded projections, my psychological evaluations showed optimal doctrinal alignment, and the Inquisition had specifically requested my participation in a long-term deep strike operation. He said I was being considered for elevation to Watch Sergeant, a recognition of my value to the Vigil. He said this as if it were an honor. I thanked him in a voice that sounded like mine, but felt borrowed from someone else. He dismissed me, and I returned to my cell and stared at Sariel's icon and wondered if the Blood Angel had heard similar words before the Harlequin broke whatever remained of his soul. The deep strike operation was codenamed Obsidian Shroud. Our target was a Tyranid splinter fleet designated Hive Fleet Moloch, moving through the Ghoul Stars toward densely populated Imperial sectors. Intelligence indicated the fleet possessed unusual behavioral patterns, suggesting synaptic innovation or hive mind experimentation, and our mission was to infiltrate a bioship, plant a virus bomb in the central ganglion, and escape before the detonation triggered a cascade failure across the fleet's neural network. The operation required a 6-member kill team, all veterans, all expendable. Vile would lead. I would serve as second. Kovash would provide tech support. The others were specialists I had never worked with, drawn from other teams and trained in xenobiological warfare. We had 2 weeks to prepare. The preparation was meticulous. We studied Tyranid physiology until I could recite the cellular structure of a Carnifex's carapace in my sleep. We drilled insertion protocols in void environments, practicing zero-gravity combat in the fortress's training spheres until our movements became muscle memory. An inquisitor from the Ordo Xenos, a woman named Vassara with augmetic eyes that glowed like embers, briefed us on the virus bomb's deployment mechanism and made us swear oaths of silence under psychic compulsion so severe, my thoughts turned sluggish and grey for hours afterward. She told us the bomb was a relic from the dark age of technology, one of only 3 in inquisitorial custody, and its loss would be considered acceptable if it destroyed Hive Fleet Moloch. She told us we were acceptable losses as well. I did not doubt her sincerity. The insertion went perfectly until it didn't. We breached the bioship's hull using melter charges and infiltrated through a capillary passage slick with Tyranid biofluids that burned through our armor's outer ceramite layer. The interior was a nightmare of pulsing organic matter, walls that breathed and floors that twitched underfoot, air thick with spores that clogged our rebreathers and triggered allergic responses even through our genetic modifications. We navigated by dead reckoning and Auspex pings, moving deeper into the ship's core while Tyranid organisms swarmed past us in the darkness, so focused on their own tasks they did not register our presence. Vael led with absolute confidence, his movements economical and precise, and I followed in his wake and marveled at how thoroughly he had been subsumed by the Death Watcher's conditioning. He was not Raven Guard anymore. He was not even Astartes in the traditional sense. He was a weapon shaped like a man, and watching him move through that alien hell was like watching a servitor execute its programming. We reached the central ganglion after 8 hours. The chamber was vast, a cathedral of flesh and synaptic tissue, and at its center hung a node the size of a battle tank, pulsing with bioluminescent light and trailing neural cables into the surrounding walls. This was the ship's brain, or part of it, the nexus through which the hive mind coordinated the organism's functions. Kovash set the virus bomb, a cylinder of blackened metal etched with symbols I recognized as pre-Imperial text script, and armed the detonator. We had 9 minutes to reach the extraction point. Vael gave the order to move. We turned toward the exit. The hive mind noticed us. The change was instantaneous and total. Every organism in the ship pivoted toward our location with synchronized precision, and the bioship itself convulsed, sealing passages and rerouting its internal structure to trap us. Tyrannid warriors erupted from the walls, their scything talons gleaming with acidic secretions, and gene stealers poured from vents overhead in a chittering wave. We fought. Bolters roaring, flamers spewing promethium, combat blades carving through chitin and flesh. Kovash fell first, torn apart by a lictor that materialized from the shadows and bisected him before he could scream. One of the specialists, a consecrator whose name I never learned, disappeared into a swarm of rippers and emerged seconds later as a skeleton picked clean. Vael kept moving, kept shooting, kept killing, and I followed because I had no other function, no other purpose, nothing inside me except the imperative to survive and complete the mission. We reached the extraction point with 40 seconds remaining. The Thunderhawk descended through a storm of bioplasma and spore mines, its armor blackened and pitted, and we threw ourselves into the hold as the virus bomb detonated. The explosion was silent in the void but visible as a pulse of sickly green light that spread through the bioship structure, unraveling it from the inside as the virus consumed synaptic tissue and converted it into inert biomass. The ship died thrashing, its death scream transmitted through the hive mind's psychic network, and across the ghoul stars, Hive Fleet Moloch faltered and began to cannibalize itself as the cascade failure severed fleet coordination. Vael watched the destruction through the Thunderhawk's viewport and nodded once, satisfied. Then he sat down and cleaned his weapons, and I realized he felt nothing. No triumph, no relief, nothing. I felt nothing as well. Inquisitor Vasara commended us upon our return. She said the operation had exceeded expectations, that the virus bomb's effectiveness validated decades of research, that our sacrifice of team members was regrettable but statistically acceptable. She said I had distinguished myself, that my service record warranted recognition, and that Watch Commander Vicus had approved my elevation to Watch Sergeant pending final psychodoctrinal certification. I stood before her in the debriefing chamber, armor still caked with Tyrannid ichor, and listened to her words and understood they were meant as reward. But they felt like a sentence, like a door closing on whatever I had been before the vigil consumed me. The certification process took 3 weeks. Chaplains subjected me to hypno-indoctrination, psychic interrogation, gene sequencing to confirm doctrinal purity, and simulations designed to test my adherence to Death Watch protocols under extreme stress. They asked me questions about loyalty. They asked me to prioritize objectives in scenarios where human life conflicted with mission parameters. They asked me if I remembered my chapter's teachings, and when I recited Ultramarine's doctrine, they asked why those teachings should matter compared to the Vigil's imperatives. I gave them the answers they wanted because I understood the alternative was Mortius's bolt pistol, or the penitent cells, or whatever fate had claimed Heraldir and so many others who could not adapt. I had adapted. I had become what they required, and when the chaplains finally declared me fit for elevation, I felt only a distant, hollow relief. Watch Sergeant Kalis Threx. They gave me command of a new kill team, 5 warriors drawn from different chapters, and I looked at their faces and saw myself years ago, still clinging to the illusion that the Death Watch would allow them to retain their identities. I said nothing. I led them into the kill houses and ran them through scenarios until they understood that hesitation meant death, that sentiment was weakness, that only the mission mattered. I spoke in Vale's voice, or what I remembered of it, quiet and mechanical and devoid of warmth. One of them, a Crimson Fist, asked me if I missed my chapter. I told him his chapter was irrelevant and ordered him to run the scenario again until he stopped asking irrelevant questions. Within a month, he stopped asking questions entirely. The deployments continued. Years passed. I lost count of the kills, the worlds, the Xenos species catalogued and exterminated. Orcs, Eldar, Tau, Tyranids, Dark Eldar raiding parties, Hrud migrations, Rangdan remnants uncovered in abandoned sectors, each one a threat to be neutralized, a target to be eliminated, a mission to be completed with maximum efficiency and minimum risk. My kill team changed composition as warriors died or were reassigned, but I remained constant, the still point around which the Vigil's machinery rotated. I was good at what I did. The Inquisition requested my teams for high-priority operations. Watch Commander Vicus cited me in strategic briefings. I received commendations I did not read and honors I did not acknowledge. And I felt nothing. The realization came slowly, like ice forming over a lake. I sat in my cell after a deployment where we had purged a Genestealer cult from a Cardinal World's ecclesiarchy district, burning infected priests in their own cathedrals while terrified civilians watched from behind cordon lines. The mission had been textbook, efficient, bloodless from our perspective, but as I removed my armor and saw my reflection in the polished ceramite, I did not recognize the face staring back. The features were mine, the scars and augmetics familiar, but the eyes were empty. There was no anger there, no faith, no conviction, only exhaustion and a kind of hollowness that felt like staring into a void where something vital had once existed. I tried to remember why I had wanted to serve. Before the Death Watch, before the Vigil, when I was still a neophyte in the Ultramarines, learning the Codex Astartes from sergeants who believed in honor and brotherhood and the Primarch's vision of ordered excellence, I tried to remember the pride I had felt during my first battle, the camaraderie of my squad, the sense of purpose that came from defending humanity against the terrors of the galaxy. I could recall the events, the names, the battles, but they felt like someone else's memories, stories I had been told, but never lived. The emotional connection was gone, severed by years of conditioning and psycho-doctrinal reinforcement and the relentless grinding away of everything that did not serve the Vigil's purposes. I was a weapon, perfect, efficient, emotionless, and utterly alone. The realization should have horrified me. It should have driven me to the chaplains, to the apothecaries, to anyone who might arrest the erosion of my humanity. But I felt only a distant curiosity, as if observing the deterioration of a machine I had been tasked to maintain. I logged the observation in my personal data slate, a single line appended to decades of mission reports and kill tallies. Noted decline in effective response. Recommend monitoring. Then I sealed the file and prepared for the next deployment, because that was what I did. That was all I did. The summons came during my 8th year of service. Watch Commander Vicus requested my presence in his sanctum, a chamber at the fortress's highest point where the walls were transparent armor cries and the view stretched across Talassa Prime's blasted landscape to the void beyond. He stood silhouetted against the starfield, his massive frame rendered in shadow, and when I entered, he did not turn. He spoke to the darkness, his voice like gravel grinding in a chute. He said my service had been exemplary. He said the Vigil recognized my contributions. He said the Inquisition had noted my effectiveness. Then he said the words I had never expected to hear. My term was complete. I was being released back to the Ultramarines. I stood there, ceramite boots locked against the stone floor, and tried to process the statement. Released, returned. As if 8 years of transformation could be undone, as if I could simply walk back into the chapter that had forged me and resume the identity I had worn before the Death Watch consumed it. Vicus turned finally, and in the starlight his face was a mask of scar tissue and augmetics, his eyes pale and distant. He asked if I understood. I said yes, though I did not. He told me to report to the embarkation deck at dawn, that a shuttle would convey me to the nearest Imperial Navy facility where I could rejoin my chapter. Then he dismissed me with a gesture, and I left his presence and walked through the fortress corridors in a daze, the weight of his words pressing down like a physical force. I should have felt joy, relief, liberation. Instead, I felt terror. That night, I did not sleep. I sat in my cell and stared at the devotional alcove where Sariel's icon still rested beside the candle, and I tried to imagine myself back aboard the Macrage's Honor, surrounded by brothers who spoke of honor and the Codex and the Primarch's legacy. I tried to imagine wearing Ultramarines blue again, reciting the old litanies, serving in a company where victories were celebrated and fallen brothers mourned. The images would not cohere. They felt false, alien, like costumes I no longer fit. The Death Watch had not merely stripped away my chapter identity. It had replaced it with something else, something colder and sharper and incompatible with the warrior I had been. I was not Ultramarines anymore. I was not even certain I was Astartes in any meaningful sense. I was Death Watch. And the Death Watch did not release its grip easily. The embarkation deck was crowded the next morning. 3 other warriors stood ready for departure, each drawn from different kill teams, each wearing the black armor with their chapter pauldron restored. A salamander, an iron hand, a raptor. They looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight and adjusting straps as if the armor no longer fit correctly. I recognized the expression. The same unease I felt, the same sense of dislocation. A chaplain delivered a brief benediction, thanking us for our service to the vigil and reminding us that we carried the Emperor's will wherever we went. Then the shuttle's engines ignited, and we boarded in silence and lifted away from Thalassa Prime's surface, and I watched the watch fortress recede through the viewport until it was only a black smudge against the lunar gray. The salamander wept, quietly, his shoulders shaking, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. The iron hand stared at nothing, his augmetic eyes clicking and refocusing as if searching for targets that were not there. The raptor cleaned his combat knife with obsessive precision, the same motion repeated endlessly, his hands trembling. I sat apart from them and felt nothing, and wondered if that made me the most damaged or the most successfully reconditioned. The Navy facility was a sprawling orbital platform in the Ultramar sector, and the Ultramarines maintained a permanent garrison there. I disembarked and was met by a captain of the 4th Company, a warrior I vaguely remembered from my neophyte training decades ago. He greeted me by name, called me brother, and said the chapter was honored by my return. His words were warm, his smile genuine, but I could not reciprocate. I stood before him in my black armor, the inquisitorial rosette still bolted to my pauldron, and I saw him register my silence, my stillness, the absence of anything resembling the enthusiasm he expected. His smile faded. He asked if I was well. I told him I was functional. The word choice disturbed him. I could see it in the tightening around his eyes, but he said nothing more and escorted me to the garrison's apothecarian for processing. The apothecary was efficient and thorough. He scanned my biology, logged my augmetics, reviewed my service history from the data slate I provided. He asked about injuries sustained during the vigil. He asked about psychological status. He asked if I had experienced nightmares, hallucinations, episodes of dissociation. I answered truthfully. No nightmares, no hallucinations, no episodes, nothing. His expression grew concerned, and he ran additional scans, focusing on neurological activity and genetic markers associated with trauma response. When the results returned, he frowned and called in a librarian. The librarian was a psyker of moderate strength, and he conducted a shallow psychic examination while I sat motionless on the apothecarian's examination slab. I felt his presence in my mind, a gentle probing, and I did not resist because resistance implied I had something to protect. He withdrew after several minutes and conferred with the apothecary in low tones I could hear perfectly through my enhanced auditory cortex. They were discussing effective blunting, psycho-doctrinal scarring, potential gene seed corruption. The librarian suggested isolation and observation. The apothecary agreed. They told me I would be quartered separately from the main garrison while they assessed my reintegration potential. I spent 6 weeks in isolation. A small chamber with a cot, a desk, a single viewport overlooking the void. Apothecaries visited daily, conducting tests and asking questions I answered in monotone. Chaplains arrived periodically, delivering sermons about the Primarch's teachings and the glory of the Ultramarines' legacy. I listened without response. They asked me to recite the Codex Astartes. I recited passages flawlessly, my memory perfect, but the words were empty sounds, devoid of the conviction they were meant to carry. They asked me about my faith in the Emperor. I told them I had faith in the mission. They asked what mission. I said the mission to eliminate Xenos threats. They asked if I understood that the Ultramarines served broader purposes, that we defended the Imperium not merely through killing but through governance, diplomacy, reconstruction. I said I understood intellectually but did not feel the distinction mattered. That answer ended the isolation. The chapter master summoned me personally. Marneus Calgar, Lord Macragh, the greatest living son of Guilliman. I knelt before him in the garrison's chapel, a space adorned with banners and relics and the statues of heroes whose names I had once memorized with reverence. Calgar stood before the altar, his power fists, gauntlets of Ultramar resting on his hips, his face stern and weathered. He asked me to rise. I rose. He studied me for a long moment, his gaze penetrating, and I met it without flinching because I had stood before Inquisitors and Xenos horrors and the void itself, and even the Lord Macragh could not unsettle something that no longer possessed the capacity for unease. He asked what the Death Watch had done to me. I told him they had made me effective. He asked if I remembered why I became an Ultramarines. I told him I remembered the events but not the emotions. He asked if I wanted to serve the chapter again. I told him I wanted to serve. The chapter was irrelevant. His expression hardened, and I realized I had crossed some invisible line, violated some principle so fundamental he could not comprehend how I had forgotten it. He told me the Ultramarines were not merely a military formation. They were a brotherhood bound by shared values, by loyalty to the Primarch's vision, by a commitment to humanity's future that transcended simple warfare. He told me that effectiveness without purpose was servitude, and servitude was unworthy of the Emperor's angels. He told me I had forgotten what it meant to be Astartes. I told him the Death Watch had taught me what it meant to be Astartes. The silence that followed was absolute. Calgar stared at me as if I had spoken heresy, and perhaps I had. Then he sighed, a sound of profound weariness, and told me he could not allow me to serve in the chapter while my conditioning remained unbroken. He said I would be transferred to the Apothecarian on Macragh, where specialists would attempt to reverse the psycho-doctrinal damage. He said it might take years. He said it might fail. He said if it failed, I would be permanently assigned to solitary duties where my lack of effective response would not endanger the Brotherhood. Then he dismissed me, and I left his presence understanding that I had been judged and found wanting, not because I lacked skill or courage, but because I lacked humanity. Macragh was beautiful in ways I could no longer appreciate. The fortress of Hera rose from azure seas beneath skies the color of sapphires, and the cities sprawled across the continents in ordered perfection, monuments to the Primarch's vision of civilization. I arrived in a transport shuttle and was escorted to the Apothecarian's isolation wing, a facility built into the fortress's substructure where the walls were white stone and the air smelled of antiseptic and Medicae incense. They assigned me a personal apothecary, a veteran named Thalric who had studied at the Terran Scholastica Medicae and specialized in gene seed restoration and psychoneurological rehabilitation. He greeted me with professional courtesy and told me he would do everything possible to restore what the Vigil had taken. I asked him what that was. He said my soul. I told him I was not certain I had ever possessed one. He looked at me with something approaching pity. and for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of something that might have been shame. It died quickly, smothered by the weight of conditioning and exhaustion, but its brief existence disturbed me more than anything I had experienced in the Death Watch. It suggested something still lived beneath the armor and augmetics and psycho-doctrinal scarring, some fragment of the boy who had been recruited from Macrage Schola Progenium and transformed into a weapon. But I could not access it, could not nurture it, could not even acknowledge it without triggering the reflexes the vigil had burned into my psyche. Thalric began the rehabilitation process immediately. Hypnotherapy to counteract the Death Watch's conditioning, cognitive exercises designed to rebuild effective pathways, gene therapy to address potential biological damage. He showed me images of my former squad brothers and asked me to describe my feelings. I described nothing because I felt nothing. He played recordings of Ultramarines' victories and asked me to identify moments of pride or joy. I identified tactical successes but could not attach emotional significance to them. He brought in my former sergeant, an ancient warrior named Timon who had survived the First Tyrannic War, and Timon spoke of our shared battles and the camaraderie we had known. I listened politely and confirmed the factual accuracy of his memories, but I could not share his warmth or nostalgia. Timon wept when he left. Thalric increased the intensity of the treatments. He administered neurological stimulants designed to enhance emotional response, subjected me to psychic therapy sessions with librarians who attempted to bypass my conscious defenses and access suppressed memories, even experimented with gene sequencing modifications intended to reverse potential Death Watch-induced mutations. Nothing worked. Or rather, everything worked on a technical level, the treatments producing measurable changes in brain activity and hormonal responses, but the changes did not translate into subjective experience. I remained hollow, a functional shell animated by reflex and conditioning, capable of executing orders and maintaining biological processes, but devoid of the inner life that defined personhood. After 6 months, Thalric admitted defeat. He told me he had exhausted every treatment available within the Ultramarines' medical resources. He told me the damage was too extensive, too deeply embedded in my psycho-neurological architecture, possibly irreversible without technologies the Imperium no longer possessed or magics the chapter would never sanction. He told me he was sorry. I thanked him for his efforts and felt nothing, and his face crumpled with a grief I understood intellectually but could not reciprocate. Chapter, Master Calgar summoned me again. This time, the meeting occurred in his private strategium, a chamber lined with tactical displays and historical documents, and he was not alone. Several captains attended, along with Chief Librarian Tigurius and the Master of Sanctity. They questioned me extensively, probing my understanding of the Codex Astartes, my loyalty to the chapter, my willingness to serve in diminished capacity. I answered every question with perfect accuracy and absolute emotional detachment. They conferred among themselves, and I heard fragments of their discussion. Dangerous precedent. Cannot allow this to spread. Must protect the Brotherhood. Ultimately, Calgar rendered his judgment. I was to be assigned to the Death Spectres, a penal formation composed of Ultramarines and successor chapter warriors who had been compromised in various ways, rendered unfit for standard service but still valuable as combatants. We would undertake suicide missions, high-risk operations where strategic value outweighed the expected casualties. We would serve until death claimed us, and our names would be struck from the chapter's honor rolls, our gene seed harvested only if recovery proved feasible. It was exile disguised as duty, a way to extract value from damaged assets while preserving the chapter's integrity. I accepted without protest. The Death Spectres operated from a strike cruiser called the Penance Eternal, a battered vessel that had served for millennia and bore scars from countless engagements. I boarded with 11 other condemned warriors, each carrying their own burdens of failure or corruption or psychological damage. We did not speak. We did not fraternize. We existed in parallel, each isolated in our own prisons of traumatized psyche and broken conditioning. The missions were exactly as promised: boarding actions against space hulks infested with genostealers, planetary assaults where our role was to draw enemy fire while main forces maneuvered, rearguard actions covering evacuations from doomed worlds. We died in steady attrition, and our deaths were logged as acceptable losses, and I led my brothers into the fire and felt nothing when they fell beside me. Years passed, decades. I lost count of the deployments, the worlds, the fallen brothers whose names I never learned. The Penance Eternal became my home, its corridors more familiar than Macrogy's halls had ever been, and the Death Spectres became my brotherhood in the only way I could still understand brotherhood, a collection of broken weapons united by their brokenness. I was promoted to sergeant, then lieutenant, then captain, not through merit but through attrition, as those above me died and I survived. I survived because I was good at what I did, because the Death Watch had honed me into an instrument incapable of hesitation or doubt, and what made me unfit for the Ultramarines made me ideal for the Death Spectres. I existed, I killed, I waited for the death that never came. And then, during a deployment to a Forge world besieged by Orc hordes, I encountered another Death Watch veteran. He wore the black armor, the silver skull, and he fought with the same cold efficiency I recognized in myself. After the battle, I approached him in the debarkation zone while servitors hauled Orc corpses into incinerators. I asked which chapter he had served before the vigil. He told me he could not remember. He said the Death Watch had been his only identity for so long that his original chapter had faded into insignificance, and when his term ended, he had nowhere to return to, so he had volunteered for permanent service. I asked if he was content. He said contentment was irrelevant. He said he existed to kill Xenos, and the vigil provided ample opportunity for that purpose, and anything beyond was unnecessary complication. I recognized his words. They could have been mine. And in that moment, staring at this faceless warrior who had been consumed so thoroughly by the Death Watch that nothing remained of his former self, I understood what I had become. Not unique, not exceptional, not even particularly tragic, simply one of countless weapons produced by the Imperium's machinery of war, shaped and discarded and repurposed according to strategic necessity. The Death Watch had not destroyed me. It had revealed what I had always been beneath the veneer of chapter pride and Primarch worship, a tool, an instrument of violence, a necessary evil in a galaxy that required evil to survive. The realization should have broken me. Instead, it brought a kind of peace. I returned to the Penance Eternal and sat in my cell, a space identical to the one I had occupied on Talisa Prime, and I understood that I had been searching for something to mourn, some lost identity to grieve, when in truth there had never been anything to lose. I had been forged from childhood to kill the Emperor's enemies. The Ultramarines had given me one set of protocols. The Death Watch had given me another. The Death Spectres had given me a third. But the core remained unchanged. I was a weapon, and weapons did not require identity or purpose beyond their function. I stopped resisting. I stopped trying to remember what it felt like to be human, or Astartes, or anything other than what I was. I stopped seeking connections with my brothers or meaning in my service, or hope for a future that did not end in violent death. I simply existed, moment to moment, deployment to deployment, kill to kill. The years passed. The galaxy burned. I fought in obscurity on worlds whose names I did not learn against enemies I did not hate, and when I finally fell, struck down by a Tyrannid warrior's scything talons during a rearguard action on some nameless agri-world, my last thought was not of the Emperor or the Primarch or the Chapter or any of the ideals I had once pretended to serve. It was simply relief. Relief that the waiting was over, that the function had reached its terminus, that the weapon had finally broken beyond repair. I lay on blood-soaked earth beneath alien skies and felt the life drain from my body in steady pulses, and I welcomed the darkness not as enemy or friend, but as simple conclusion. Somewhere, apothecaries would harvest my gene seed and implant it in a new aspirant who would repeat the cycle of transformation and service and erosion. Somewhere, the Death Watch still turned warriors into weapons and discarded them when their edges dulled. Somewhere, the Imperium ground on in its eternal war against extinction, fueled by the sacrifice of souls it never acknowledged and heroes it never mourned. But I was done. I had served. I had killed. I had endured the twisted life of the Death Watch and survived long enough to understand that survival was not victory but merely prolonged suffering. And now, finally, mercifully, it was finished. The darkness took me gently, and I surrendered to it without resistance, a weapon returning to the armory, a tool laid aside, a life that had never truly been lived, reaching its unremarkable end in the mud and blood of a galaxy that would never remember my name.